All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, either live today or listening later at home. Our webinar today is on dam safety and dam removal, protecting communities and restoring rivers. My name is Katie Schmidt, and I'm the Associate Director of the National Dam Removal Program at American Rivers. I manage our National Dam Removal Community of Practice, our federal policy agenda for dam safety and dam removal, and I work with our federal agency partners and local partners to expand the practice of dam removal. I also am a member of FEMA's National Dam Safety Program Review Board, and I work closely with our partners at the Association of State Dam Safety Officials on dam safety priorities. I will be your webinar facilitator today, and I have a few housekeeping notes for everyone. You can communicate with us, even though you are muted and your cameras are off. If you navigate down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat feature and the Q&A feature. Please use the Q&A feature for your questions. If you put them in the chat, they're really easy to get lost. So please use Q&A for that. And then I would like everyone to open up the chat feature and take a moment to type in your name, organization, and location so we can know who is in the room with us. We have over 100 attendees today. So please take a moment again to put your name, organization, and location into the chat. All right, so an overview of American Rivers before we dive in. American Rivers is a national river conservation organization working to protect and restore rivers across the country, and we've been doing this work for 50 years. We've been removing dams for over 25 years, and we've been supporting the dam safety community throughout that time. Our organization offers webinars on dam removal regularly, especially for our community of practice, and you can receive the recordings of our past webinars on our community of practice webpage. I'll throw that link into the chat in just a little bit. We're really excited for folks to join us for this incredibly important dam removal topic, which is dam safety. We know that thousands of people live downstream of dams, and this is a public safety issue. Dam safety is a bipartisan issue that we know has wide support on both sides of the aisle. And this webinar will dive into using dam removal as a dam safety solution. So today you'll hear from 3 speakers on how the solution has been used nationally and in different states. As you will hear, dams are aging across the country and bearing the brunt of the impacts of climate change. What we're seeing as a result is an increasing concern for the structural integrity of these structures, as well as increasing support for dam removal as a permanent dam safety solution. Our first speaker today will be Brian Graber from American Rivers. Brian is our senior dam removal strategist with American Rivers. He is a leader on our national program team, leading our federal policy work and supporting staff around the country in scaling the practice of dam removal. Brian is trained as a fluvial geomorphologist and water resources engineer, and he specializes in river habitat restoration and restoration program building. Brian also co-chairs the Uncommon Dialogue Dam Safety Work Group. We will then have John Roach join us. He is the Division Chief of the Maryland Dam Safety Office under the Maryland Department of the Environment, where he has worked for 10 years. John also serves as the Association of State Dam Safety Officials Board of Directors, and he has a background in geotechnical engineering, and his work in Maryland includes emergency preparedness and response, policy development, communication and outreach, hydrology and hydraulics, and natural resources management. And John helped with developing the Maryland Guidance on Dam Removal that his office published just last April. And finally, we have Karina Daly, who is the Ecological Restoration Coordinator for the Vermont Natural Resources Council, where she runs the VNRC Dam Removal Program. Karina brings her scientific knowledge and expertise to policy issues around the conservation and restoration of Vermont's waters. And she works on the ground projects and dam removal projects. She also works on state policy for water resources management. Karina also chairs the Vermont Dam Removal Task Force, which provides projects prioritizes projects for dam removal and provides education and outreach. We're so grateful to have our 3 incredible speakers here today, so thank you all for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing and pass it to Brian Graber.
Hello, everyone. So we're talking with you today about dam safety. I started my dam removal career working in states like Wisconsin and New Hampshire, where state dam safety offices were looking for help from dam removal specialists like me to help dam owners remove their liabilities. often those liabilities were dams that were built decades to centuries ago. They were no longer serving their original purpose, and they could not do things like viably produce hydropower. So here's my summary for the next 15 minutes of my time. Number one, there are a lot of dams out there. Number two, those dams are aging. Many don't provide an economic benefit to their owners, and as a result, an absurd number of these dams are failing. In addition, an even more absurd number of people have drowned in the hydraulics created downstream of low-head dams. Low-head dams are those dams where the flow of water goes over a relatively low spillway all the time. And then dam safety is mostly led by state dam safety offices in the country. And with the vast number of dams in the nation, dam safety offices have an impossible job with very limited resources. As a result, dam owners are often looking for help to remove obsolete, uneconomical, or unsafe dams. And more often, dam safety offices are supporting dam removal, working with those dam owners. And that's it. And now I'll give you some data and stories to back all of that up and some thoughts on what we're doing in the dam removal community to support dam safety. I'll start with how I, as a dam removal specialist, got actively involved in dam safety advocacy and dam safety work. In 2003, I started working in the Massachusetts Department of Fish and Game. I helped to build a dam removal program there. And through that work, I was working around dams all the time, and I was shocked at how many dams were in bad shape around the state. I worked right down the hall from the dam safety office, and I often went to their office to review files on the dams that I was working on. They had about 5 people working there. And they were overseeing 3,000 dams in the state. So 5 people, probably 3 of them were inspectors working on 3,000 dams. In 2005, a private developer purchased the mill property that came along with the dam that you see here. It's called the Whitman Mill Dam. The dam had no purpose, not even a recreational purpose. And just a few months after that owner purchased the dam, there was a big rainstorm and the dam nearly failed. And it forced the evacuation of 2,000 people from their homes and businesses in downtown Taunton, Massachusetts. And you can see in the bottom left there, folks like Barney Frank, Ted Kennedy, John Kerry, Mitt Romney, all standing at the edge of the dam, pondering what we should do about the dam that was about to fail. And then on the bottom right, you can see the kids making fun of it downtown, wearing their life jackets and flippers and so on. The dam did not fail, but the dam safety office did come up under intense fire from everyone, elected officials, the governor's office, the general public. And that just, having worked with them quite a bit, that just really triggered my unfair button. Remember, 5 people, 3,000 dams in the state. And I remember a conversation that I had with my director in the Fish and Game department at the time. I said to her, we need to say something about this. We need to offer our assistance. We need to help the dam safety office. And she, really out of fear of also being negatively noticed by the governor's office, she said to me, basically, Brian, don't say a word. Do your own job. And so a couple years later, when I was hired by American Rivers in 2007, I partnered with the Nature Conservancy, and I went to the Massachusetts State House and I testified for dam safety changes to do things like get more resources to the dam safety office, help get them better enforcement teeth, and especially to start a plan that required dam owners to hire qualified engineers themselves and pay for their own dam inspections rather than expect the 3 dam inspectors in the state to inspect 3,000 dams. When that legislation passed in the state, it instantly, more dams were inspected, dam safety dramatically improved. And Karina's going to talk more in a little bit here about how to run a state level campaign to improve dam safety laws. So I'll leave the rest of that story to her. And it turns out, though, that Massachusetts is not unique. In Hurricane Helene in September in North Carolina, more than 90 dams were significantly damaged. The State Dam Safety Office now estimates that 75 of those should be removed. According to the Association of State Dam Safety Officials, 1,323 dams have failed in the United States or required emergency intervention to prevent that failure. And these numbers are mind-boggling to me, and they're also under-recognized. Maybe an even more absurd number is how many people die at low-head dams. Excuse me. Low-head dams are again, dams where the flow goes over the spillway all the time. They create a reverse flow pattern that is impossible to paddle out of or swim out of. And according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, more than 1,400 people have drowned in the hydraulics created by these types of dams. So I'm going to pause to let you consider that number and, again, how under-recognized this is as a public safety issue. In addition to that, many of these low-head dams are too small to be regulated by state programs, which focus more on dam failures than they do at accidents that occur at dams. All right, so the problem is there are a lot of dams out there. Many of those dams do not bring a revenue source to their dam owners, and many, possibly most of them, were built decades to centuries ago. They no longer serve the purpose they were built to provide. For example, when you look at the data that's in the NID, which is the National Inventory of Dams, only about 3% of dams in that inventory provide hydropower. And I would add there, because you need a lot of head, a lot of drop, and consistent flows, only about 3% are really capable of providing significant hydropower. So there are a lot of dams out there. Dam owners lack the resources to maintain them. We have found anecdotally that active, productive hydropower dams are much more likely to be in good condition than, say, old mill dams, because those owners just don't have the resources to keep up with them. And John's going to show you in just a few moments here number of dams from the national inventory. That inventory by design tracks only the largest dams in the country. We've also been working with the Southeast Aquatic Resources Partnership and the Fish and Wildlife Service. They've been assembling an inventory of all the dams that are out there, and their number currently is at around 533,000 and counting. So there are a lot of dams. And along with that vast number, state dam safety offices who regulate the majority of dams, those offices are universally underfunded and understaffed. Again, they have impossible jobs considering the resources available to them and the number of dams that they're expected to regulate. So recognizing that, we at American Rivers, we worked with the Association of State Dam Safety Officials and successfully advocated for $875 million from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to go to FEMA's National Dam Safety Program, which was a tiny program within FEMA. And we advocated that the bulk of those funds should be distributed to states for dam safety purposes. However, FEMA has struggled with their own bureaucracy to get funds out quickly, and as a result, Homeland Security repurposed about a third of those funds to other things. Then an added challenge there is that by state legislation, far too many dams are not jurisdictional to state dam safety offices. They have size cutoffs or they have exemptions, such as for agricultural dams. For example, the state of Missouri has 1,123 dams that are rated as high hazard or significant hazard, meaning that if they failed, they could kill somebody or do significant property damage. So 1,123 dams that are unregulated by the state because of legislative exemptions. And so their physical condition of those more than 1,000 dams is unknown. Changing jurisdiction has also been a problem as new regulatory bodies aren't able to immediately enforce on problems passed along by other regulatory bodies. So two of the most high-profile dam failures of the last few years resulted from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission revoking hydropower licenses at the Spencer Dam in Nebraska, which you see here in the photo, and the Edenville Dam in Michigan, because those dam owners had repeat violations at their dams. When that happened, FERC revoked their licenses. Jurisdiction shifted from FERC for dam safety to the states for dam safety, and in both cases, about a year later, the dams failed. The Spencer Dam here killed a man downstream. Edenville did hundreds of millions of dollars of damages downstream. And it's these kinds of situations that continue to reiterate the impossible jobs of state dam safety staff. And courts have typically found dam owners liable for damages. The most famous negligence case in the last couple decades is the dam that you see here. It's the Coloco Dam, which breached in 2006 after the owner went against dam safety orders, and the dam owner built structures on his spillway, which limited the ability of this dam to release floodwaters. The dam failed in the next big storm. It killed 7 people downstream. The dam owner was sentenced to 7 months in jail, 5 years of probation, and was fined for 7 counts of manslaughter and reckless endangerment. The Edenville dam failure, which I mentioned a moment ago in Michigan, that dam owner was held liable for $119 million in damages to the state. So dam owners, recognizing that they don't want to become the next Coloco or the next Edenville, the responsible owners look for help when they can't afford to maintain their dams. And this leads to a key point, that the dam removals that we work on, they're all done with dam owner consent. They're usually done with dam owner partnership on the projects. For the majority of dam removals, dam owners have a liability, and we help them with the fundraising and technical assistance to remove that liability. So a few state dam safety offices have recognized dam removal as an important way to eliminate dam safety problems. And they're also supporting dam owners who are interested in removing their dams. And I'll tell you about a few of these state dam safety pioneers, hopefully to serve as some inspiration for what advocates and dam safety offices can do. I'll start with Wisconsin. Wisconsin was the first real dam removal leader in the nation, and that started in their dam safety office. It was led by Dick Knitter in the 1980s and later by Meg Galloway, who I worked with for quite a while in the 1990s and early 2000s. I ran into Meg Galloway at the ASDSO conference last month, and she reflected there that 20 years ago, she was the only one among dam safety officials who was talking about dam removal. And now this year, everyone at the dam safety conference was talking about dam removal. So that kind of just reflects on how far we've come with the concept. So Wisconsin started ordering dam owners to have adequate spillway sizes, and they gave them the choice to either expand their spillway capacity or remove their dams. And they partnered with a strong statewide rivers nonprofit, the River Alliance of Wisconsin, who provided project management and project assistance. And this led to 140 dam removals since 1982 in Wisconsin. I'll also talk about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has removed more dams than any other state, 390 in our database so far. And they also started in the dam safety office. So around 2001, the state of Pennsylvania, the dam safety office sent letters to all dam owners. It was a normal letter about things like signage at their dams. And they closed the letter advertising dam removal funding and assistance if dam owners chose to take that option. They got an overwhelming response from dam owners, and they developed what they call a restoration permit waiver, which doesn't really waive owners from anything. It just means that the state sees dam removal as such an important activity that the dam safety staff will complete the regulatory process for the applicant. In addition, they have other mechanics there, like funding through their Growing Greener program, strong leadership from the State Fish and Boat Commission, and our staff at American Rivers has acted as project managers to the majority of the projects. A couple more states. New Hampshire recognized the need in 2001 to remove dams, and so they created a position in their dam safety office to assist dam owners with dam removal. They were able to afford this position in the dam safety office because New Hampshire requires dam owners to register their dams and pay a fee to the state, which then allows the dam safety office to have the staffing that they have. So this position leads a statewide task force of agencies and nonprofits to prioritize projects and assist with funding to complete those projects. When I was part of that task force, typically a dam inspector from the dam safety office would present a set of potential projects where dam owners had expressed that they were struggling with maintaining their structures. And we would identify potential funding sources. We would identify potential project managers to those projects. few other really quick examples. Michigan and Mississippi have state dam safety grant funding programs that are administered by their dam safety offices. Michigan seeks out dam removals, whereas Mississippi, which is a new program, lists dam removals an eligible activity. And then finally, states like Maryland have produced dam removal guidance. And with that, I will turn it over to John Roach to talk about Maryland's dam removal guidance and the take from the dam safety office.
Thank you so much, Brian. And as John is getting his screen ready, I'll just remind folks that we do have the Q&A feature. So I saw that there was a question or two in the chat, and those do sometimes get buried. So make sure you put them in the Q&A feature. But Sarah, thank you for putting up the aquatic barriers website. All right, John, on to you.
All right. Thanks, Katie and Brian. Happy to talk here today about dams in our country. And I'm going to start talking about the framework of regulation of dams in the country. As Brian alluded to multiple times, it is driven on a state-by-state basis, and that creates some unique challenges, but also unique opportunities nationally. And then I'll talk about our experience in Maryland as a state dam safety program, our kind of evolution of handling dams removals for dam safety, and which eventually led to our dam removal guidance. So I love this image I found here about the growth of U.S. dams and reservoirs over time. Certainly, as our nation has grown, dams and reservoirs have grown along with it. And that's because they often, but again, as we've heard, not always, serve a very vital purpose, right? Whether that's water supply, irrigation for crops, flood control, stormwater management, hydroelectric power, a lot of other sources. There's a lot of dams out there. And we also do recognize that oftentimes, particularly with the more aged dams, the original intended purpose and use is no longer part of the fabric or framework of that dam and the owner and the community around it, right? It might be a mill, historic mill, which is no longer existing, but the dam remains, or a water supply that's been modernized and left as a recreational asset. So with partnership in the states and federal dam safety regulatory agencies, the Army Corps of Engineers maintains the national inventory of dams, which lists about 92,000 dams right now. And I think as a piece of infrastructure, it's fascinating that around the country, we think of infrastructure as kind of publicly owned and for the public good. While dams can often serve the public good, about 2/3 of them are either privately owned or the ownership is unknown, which would tend to lend yourself to thinking it might be privately owned, perhaps by a defunct organization or company. So that's a large swath of the dams across our country that are in the hands of private owners. And that creates challenges when it comes to regulating them, when it comes to ensuring that they're kept in a safe condition. I've listed here what the regulatory criteria are for dams to be included in the NID, and that information is oftentimes what states will follow for how it sets their regulatory thresholds. Although we know all these numbers are underestimates, right? In Maryland, for example, we regulate a broader subset of dams. Approximately 130 additional, what I'll call capital D dams, are regulated directly in our state inventory than what the NID shows. And that doesn't count the approximately 20,000, what we call small ponds in our state, which are formed by dam embankments and usually consist of stormwater management ponds or agricultural ponds. They're regulated, but in a slightly different manner. So on this slide here, you'll see the growth of dam safety programs across the country, right? It's not all happened at one time where states enacted dam safety laws and set up dam safety offices. Fortunately, now today in 2024, we have, we'll call it 49 and a half states have a dam safety program. Alabama's getting close. They have some enabling legislation, but there's still a long way to go to consider that being a fully functioning dam safety program. So a lot of people wonder why regulation of dams, both their design, their construction, operation, and enforcement has been left to the purview of each state. And that comes from a couple different angles. First, the regulation of dams and regulations of lots of things are often in response to a disaster. So you think of the St. Francis Dam disaster in California, which not only led to the state dam safety program, but the concept of licensing professional engineers as well. And other states, as issues have grown, perhaps not in their state, but in neighboring states, they've reacted to protect the citizens in the state and created some framework to ensure the dams are kept safe. Now, in the 1970s, after a number of notable failures, Buffalo Creek in West Virginia, Laurel Run in Pennsylvania, Teton Dam in Idaho, and Toccoa Falls Bible College in Georgia, Congress did ask the Army Corps, hey, should we set up a national framework and a national regulatory body for dams? That partially kicked off the 1970s phase one inspections. A lot of people will refer to that as kind of some of the first times in the cataloging of dams across the country was undertaken, an understanding of what the condition is. But ultimately, the Army Corps reported back to Congress that we've got multiple states already with some type of program, whether it's mature or still evolving. We really don't have a grasp of the number of dams out there or their condition. So we're reluctant to set up a national model, and we defer to the states to regulate the dams as they see fit. Now, that doesn't mean the states haven't had some assistance from the federal government. There are federal guidelines, which often states will borrow from, whether that's FEMA, National Resource Conservation Service, Bureau of Reclamation, Army Corps, to help set some of their standards. And then the National Dam Safety Program Act, which was first passed in 1996, set up the National Dam Safety Review Board, which Katie mentioned, and provides a limited grant funding to state dam safety programs to grow their program and hopefully meet that model state dam safety program document that ASDSO and FEMA have put together and recently updated. Now, thinking about how do we handle unsafe dams and how do we look at the concept of dam safety and moving it towards dam removal, we have to recognize that state dam safety enforcement actions are as diverse as the rules and regulations of each state. So it's important, as we discuss here, that what I'm speaking from is a broad paintbrush, and it may be slightly different in each state. But that being said, in general, most state dam safety programs start with voluntary compliance efforts when a dam has been identified to be unsafe or out of regulation. This is often, kicked off by those inspections that Brian mentioned. We inspect the dam, we find it to be unsafe, and we require action. A 2020 ASDSO report and a summary on state laws and regulations show that most states, all states really, have the ability to issue orders and directives to correct violations of dam safety rules and regulations. About 80% of states can issue fines and penalties to violators, though that cuts both ways, and we'll talk about that more on the next few slides. States can refer dam owners to criminal court in about 50% of the cases. And unfortunately, only about 40% of the states have a dedicated dam repair or loan grant program to help dam owners bring their dams into good condition. And while 40% of the states may have a program, the funding levels of those programs can fluctuate as each individual state legislature sees fit. So it may not be a viable source to help dam owners. When pursuing enforcement efforts and driving towards compliance with dam safety rules and regulations, a lot of state dam safety offices will offer the option of either repair or removal as acceptable alternatives. And in some cases, state laws allow for states to take over a dam and render it safe in an imminent failure case or in the case of an emergency, maybe like we saw recently in some of the hurricane efforts. Now, that's difficult sometimes because it requires funding to make it safe, and not all states have a pot of money available for that. But typically, if a state were to take over a dam because the dam owner has demonstrated that they're not financially capable or they're not a responsible asset owner, removal is often the first priority there, because fixing a dam only to have it give it back to an owner who can't maintain it is not a clear win there. Now, thinking about what barriers states face in dam safety enforcement and how that pertains to dam removals, I think there's a couple of key points to bring up that can work against enforcement as a big picture. The first of those is what I would say is fatigue. So enforcement can take many years and significant resources of a state dam safety office. And as Brian mentioned, many of us are under-resourced. So oftentimes that voluntary compliance will start with a letter asking for repairs and then step it up to orders or notice of violations and potentially fines in civil court. But owners, like in any kind of regulatory process, have their rights and can contest the decisions, and things can drag out for a very long time, which is a significant burden on the state dam safety program to keep moving. And in addition, there's not often a clear finish line, right? We may be pursuing enforcement against dam owners, but if they can't afford to make the repairs or removals as needed, all of that effort may still be fruitless. So how do you keep on pushing, and should you keep on pushing a program to bring a dam into compliance if there's no clear-cut answer and finish line? And then lastly, again, as these enforcement cases proceed, there's opportunities for interference and other people to get involved. Maybe that's leadership in an organization, elected officials or whatnot who are campaigning for their constituents, but they may try to slow or stop the enforcement process. So lastly, I'll just mention compliance options for states before we move into Maryland's experience with dam removals. When we talk about unsafe dams, I do want to take a step back here a little bit and recognize that unsafe represents a large range of conditions for dams. A dam may be damaged and significantly hurt, maybe because of an overtopping event in a storm, where water flows over the embankment and scours it out. But it may also be classified as unsafe because it doesn't have adequate spillway capacity. And in some cases, it can have significant amount of spillway capacity, but not all that's needed. For high and significant hazard dams across the country, we generally design towards something called the probable maximum flood, which is generated by the probable maximum precipitation. And in Maryland, that's often about 27 or 28 inches of rain in only 6 hours. So a dam that can handle 95% of that requirement would be considered unsafe in our state, even though it can handle, let's say, 26.5 inches of rain in 6 hours, an extraordinary amount. So dam owners have a lot of options to bring their dam into compliance. We've talked about owners being willing participants in removal cases, and if there's value to the dam as well. Does it provide value to a dam owner, whether it's economic revenue or other resources? Maybe it's crop irrigation for a farmer. Repair or retrofit may be the preferred alternative in those cases. In some cases, owners will actually modify their dam so that it's lesser regulated or becomes unregulated by a state. Perhaps they can cut it down to a lesser height or reduce the storage volume, taking it from a higher hazard classification to a lower hazard classification, and it comes out of regulation. So it may or may not be fixed, but states may not have tools to enforce it at that point. And then lastly, breaching or removing the dam when it provides no value to the owner and community is certainly a preferred option. So marching into our experience in Maryland that ultimately led up to our dam removal guidelines. As a state dam safety office, for many years in Maryland, dam removal was kind of viewed with some skepticism because these projects were often ecologically driven based on environmental concerns or fish passage or stream restoration, but weren't necessarily targeted towards complying with dam safety laws and fixing those dams that we needed fixed or removed, which were priorities for our office. So our program often took a backseat role because these were complex, multi-stakeholder, multi-regulator efforts that weren't necessarily driving towards our dam safety goals. Although at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that a dam that's been removed is always safer than a dam that remains. So These projects also, because they're large multi-stakeholder projects and we had limited resources, we weren't able to really independently champion projects and push them towards the finish line when there was a dam safety need. So I'll point out some examples of those where we did eventually acquire some more resources and champion projects to remove dams, to resolve dam safety issues, but also had all the wraparound benefits as well. Good example of one of these more ecologically driven removals that wasn't necessarily driven by a dam safety need is the Simpkins Dam removal on the Patapsco River, only a few miles from where I sit today. That was completed by American Rivers in 2010 and is a great success story. Please don't get me wrong on that. Opening up the Patapsco River is wonderful for that river valley and the ecology, but we didn't take a prime driver's seat in that project. So over the years, we've had a lot of factors that have generated more interest in dam removals and made our shop really want to pursue them as a ways to seeking dam safety compliance. One of those factors is the notion of what we call hazard creep. So that's the phenomena where development downstream of a dam increases what's known as its hazard classification. So dams are classified based on the consequences of their failure. Think how many homes may be inundated, what the potential loss of life might be. And as more development occurs downstream from a dam that might be considered low hazard with different design requirements is now bumped up to a high or significant hazard potential, meaning that there will be loss of life if it fails. And we've seen our inventory of dams in the state of Maryland grow by about 100 or about 20% in the past decade because of this phenomenon, which has led to significant amounts of enforcement actions to have these dams brought into up to the proper design criteria. We're also seeing the effects of climate change in Maryland, although right now we're in a historic drought. We can think back to 2016 and 2018, the Ellicott City, Maryland storms, which were both 1,000-year storm events over the same watershed, stressing lots of smaller local dams. Thankfully, none that were reported to have completely failed, but definitely some were injured. And then, of course, the dams across the country and in Maryland are aging. Many of ours are over 60, our average is 60 years old. Some of ours are well over 100, in some cases 200 years old. And they just simply need that increased level of maintenance and upkeep. We also have an administration that's more focused on driving enforcement to a completion. So, getting rid of that notion of fatigue and setting clear finish lines for us. And as a result, we've been given some increased staffing to have flexibility to champion projects for removals. And I'll mention two of these here very briefly. The 2016 Martin Farm Pond Dam was a dam that was in imminent danger of failure. It's an earthen embankment. You can see here in this photo, it's overgrown and wooded, and there's kind of a cavern in the center of this hillside. Well, that's the dam embankment itself. That linear feature you see in the foreground is the corrugated metal spillway pipe that was over 50 years old. It had rusted out, and as water was flowing from the reservoir downstream through that rusted pipe, the water would erode the earthen embankment along with it and create what we call an internal erosion or piping failure mode. And it was significant. It created a void both on the upstream and downstream sides of the dam that nearly connected and would have, it was a miracle it hadn't failed, basically, was my opinion. And adding to the difficulty was that the owner of this dam was a 92-year-old widow, and she had no capability of maintaining the dam, no interest in keeping it, and quite honestly, she was scared that because it had also seen development downstream of her farm, that she would put people in danger's way if the dam weren't removed. And fortunately, because this was a wonderful case for removal with a very willing owner and a high-quality brook trout watershed, we were able to scrape together funding and champion a project to successfully remove this dam. Another case of dam removals to resolve a dam safety issue that was championed by our office was the Cascade Lake Dam removal on a tributary to the Patapsco River in 2018. This here is an old mill dam. a couple 100 years old. You can see on the lower photo, it's got this dry stack stone face and then an earth embankment behind it. Now, the interesting thing about this mill dam is that it was actually in need. The mill was no longer in purpose, but the lake and the area surrounding it was a private, recreation park, basically, as opposed to like a local or state park. A private owner owned it and you could pay to come in. This dam experienced 2 back-to-back thunderstorms over the course of a week. It filled and flowed over the embankment, causing what I call these 2 shark bites on the lower side. This is an example of a head cutting formed by erosion, what we call an overtopping failure mode. Because this was an emergency, again, this is a significant hazard dam and there was risk to life downstream, we were able to work with the local emergency managers to safely remove this dam and reduce the hazard, creating a safe dam.
John, we're at time. I'm so
Okay,
sorry.
thanks. Sorry.
This has been so great. Do you mind, or I think you have the link in your presentation. I can also put the link to the dam safety guidelines or the dam removal guidelines in the chat.
That would be great. Yes.
Yeah.
The dam removal guidelines, I will just say very briefly, or our tool, because we couldn't make laws and regulations easier to remove dams. And we knew that cost was such a factor in removing dams. And this was our way to provide a straight road towards permitting and logistics and project planning to make dam removals easier for facilitators when we had other roadblocks like the laws and whatnot that we couldn't necessarily change. We're hoping it will come in handy for future dam removals.
Thank you so much, John. And they're great guidance. We'll go ahead and make sure the link is in the chat so that everybody can see that. All right, Karina, all you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karina Daly, restoration ecologist with Vermont Natural Resources Council. Feeling grateful to work and live in Vermont today. It's a small state where we can make big change. And I get the honor of telling the story about how Vermont accepted new dam safety legislation. And I'll just say that this work started way beyond my career in dam removal and dam safety policy work. And I want to say thank you to mentors and partners who started this momentum. And that includes Brian Fitzgerald, David Dean, Jared Carpenter, John Groveman, Ron Rhodes, Michelle Braun, Roy Schiff, Jessica Luisos, and the Dam Safety Program and DEC partners, Ben Green, Steve Hanna, Todd Moniz, Neil Kamen, and Kim Greenwood. And I know there are many others, but this just tells you what a community Vermont has that is working on this good work. And I spoke to many of these people in advance of this presentation to help inform the story. And I'll just say that the Vermont Dam Task Force, and I think Katie introduced the Vermont Dam Task Force earlier, but is that convening organization as well as VNRC, which brings those groups together to consistently collaborate on dam removal, dam safety, and uphold dam removal science. With that, I will try to advance my slide. There we go. So the problem. Vermont has over 1,000 aging dams obstructing our waterways and no public inventory. Hundreds of these dams serve no useful purpose. They're in poor condition and they haven't been maintained, and there's no mechanism for maintaining them. Many of these dams are smaller dams that have avoided state oversight. And with climate change, in the face of climate change, Vermont's recognized that our natural infrastructure is our best defense moving forward. And so there's an urgency related to that to reconnect rivers. And then the dam safety program was severely understaffed, had only 2 staff before 2018, so really no resources to compel change. The goal was to make us safer and provide us with additional tools to manage rivers towards equilibrium conditions. This is directly from David Dean in my conversation with him. He's currently chair of Trout Unlimited in Vermont. So Act 161 came about in 2018, and that was the act relating to the regulation of dams. And again, I think it was that collaborative effort in the spirit of Vermont and a confluence of ideas. So everyone coming together at the same time in line to support dam safety legislation and reduce the risk to people and their property, enhancing management efforts that during floods and major storm events, and facilitating the removal of derelict dams. And I'll just say that, that David called this a perfect storm of alignment with administration, legislation, Vermont Emergency Management, the Vermont Dam Task Force, the water NGO community, including Vermont Natural Resources Council, Trout Unlimited, and Watersheds United Vermont. And I'm going through this a little bit fast because I recognize that we are short on time, but Katie, let me know how I'm doing. So the process, I think this legislation, the process was fairly straightforward. There really weren't a lot of barriers in this legislation, but I think it was identifying that problem with all of the partners and just the consistency of meetings with interested parties. And, you know, I want to say it's a simple 12-step process, but I think a lot of these steps are reoccurring throughout the process. But it's meeting with those interested parties, making sure everyone's at the table, drafting that problem statement, and having more meetings about it, refining that based on everyone's input, and organizing a campaign, identifying allies and opponents, and connecting with those folks and having them at the table. David shared with the legislation here in 2018 that historic preservation was an important ally, and that sometimes historic preservation can be a barrier with dam removal and repairing dams, and having them engaged in the conversation early and working at the table was really important.
Sorry, Karina, can we pause for just a moment?
Yeah.
I just got someone that said they can't see your slides, and Brian also said that.
Oh,
Can folks put into the chat if they cannot see Karina's slides? I can see them, so I didn't flag anything.
okay.
Okay, Alex, you can now. That's good. Other folks can see them. Okay, sorry for the pause, Karina. I just want to make sure that we could actually see what you're doing.
No. And yeah, I think there was a problem with it advancing at first, but it seems to be moving now.
Okay. Thanks. All right, go on.
And then identifying sponsors for the bill after we've drafted the legislation and organizing that testimony. And I'll just say that David Dean at the time was chair of House Natural Resources and sponsored the bill. And I think he was headed towards retirement. So this was an important time for him to leave an important mark in the dam safety community. And then organizing press events, community meetings, lots of education and outreach related to the legislation process. And what we got out of that was Act 161. And there's two phases to Act 161. This was enacted in 2018. Phase 1 is the administrative portion of the act, and that is complete. We've addressed that, but that refined the definition of dams. It defines what a dam is and what it isn't. Beaver dams, culverts, stormwater management structures, water tanks, manure pits were specifically excluded. It defines owner obligation and responsibility and requires registration, providing DEC with a mechanism to request an info from dam owners related to public safety. It makes the Vermont dam inventory publicly available. This is a big deal because before this, there was an inventory that was housed in dam safety, but no one had access to it, so it wasn't public facing. And there were a lot of dams coming under identification through the Dam Task Force and others that weren't in the inventory. Should they be in the inventory? So ultimately having a public-facing inventory was hugely helpful in that process. And then a requirement that a dam be recorded in the land records of the municipality where it's located. This allows people to access information that can be utilized to develop local, regional, and state hazard mitigation plans. And those hazard potential definitions were updated to match the national inventory. And then phase 2. So phase 2 has yet to be complete. This is where we are now in Act 161. And the delay here has been the flooding in Vermont, which has overwhelmed the capacity of the Dam Safety Division. And they've been working hard to complete dam inspections and manage the dams that they currently have. They have 992 dams under their jurisdiction. And but this is planned for 2025, calendar year 2025. And really, this is the technical standards. So it requires DEC to develop rules to address gaps in current oversight of dams, including standards for design, construction, inspection, operation, maintenance, and develop emergency action plans. Some critical stages along the way. These are moments that I think help move the needle towards dam safety. Was in 2022, the state auditor performed an audit focused on the regulatory practices, periodic inspections, and inventorying of high and significant hazard dams. And they identified some deficiencies. And that audit was, had a lot of media attention, and its recommendations included accelerating the rulemaking process for that phase 2, updating our inspection requirements, making inventory improvements to the database, and providing staffing for dam safety. Additionally, the American Society of Civil Engineers releases a report card every year on Vermont's infrastructure. And in 2023, that report card received a grade C. And the recommendations to raise that grade included staffing up dam safety, removing the split jurisdiction in Vermont, which there's jurisdiction both within dam safety of dams oversight and then with the Public Utilities Commission for hydropower dams that existed pre-FERC. And so that is an inefficient process to have 2 state bodies overseeing managing dams in the state. And so that was another issue. And then again, staffing up both the dam safety program and the rivers program in Vermont to support dam safety. And then ultimately, the Great Flood of 2023 happened. Specifically, there was a flood both in December and July, and it was that July flood that was exceptionally devastating and had the biggest impact on the dam safety program. During that storm, 5 dams failed completely. 53 were majorly damaged and 57 were overtopped in a 7-inch rain event in one day. Dam Safety did an excellent job, but recognized they needed more support. They contracted out some of the work, but they were able to complete 390 dam inspections and follow-up inspections on 65 dams. So there was a recognition that timing is critical for this work and the urgency is real. And the silver lining in the destruction and damage from the flooding was that people began to connect the dots about the dam in their backyard and the liability and impact to public safety and downstream communities. And then meetings began between the Dam Task Force and Dam Safety with those updates of some of the numbers I shared with you. And this is an example. This dam received a lot of attention during the 2023 flood, but this is a dam in Williamstown, Vermont, Rouleau Pond Dam, that overtopped. It did not fail, but it caused substantial damage, and the impact from this overtopping also impacted the downstream community of Williamstown. and it's a significant hazard dam, and the dam safety program was able to exercise their regulation enforcement with an unsafe dam order, which basically requires the landowner to make the dam safe in the short term, and the state will pay for that using their dam safety revolving loan fund on the condition that they will remove that dam. So that loan is forgivable with the condition that the landowner will remove the dam as soon as they are able. So in this case, they breached the dam by 4 feet, lowered the water level, and stabilized the dam while we continue to work to raise funds for a full removal of this dam. And ultimately, as a result of these flooding, Act 121, the Flood Safety Act, was introduced, and this was an act relating to the regulation of wetlands, river corridor development, and dam safety. So a watershed scale approach to public safety and resilience, with 3 goals: to limit development in the most dangerous and flood vulnerable areas, strengthen oversight and maintenance requirements for dam owners, and invest in the removal of dams that exacerbate flooding, together enhancing public safety, and improving wetland mapping and reporting of wetlands. This act basically gave 15 new positions to Vermont DEC, 5 in the dam safety program and 10 in rivers and wetlands. So that almost doubled the capacity of the dam safety program, which is tremendous. And they're currently hiring for those positions right now. And it provides DEC with more enforcement authority and enhanced funding in that dam safety revolving loan fund, both for emergency and non-emergency dams, with an alternatives analysis, so more criteria involved with looking at dam removal as an option when public monies are being spent on these dams. This is a project that I'm working on in Northfield, Vermont, the Cross Brothers Dam, which I think tells a great story. We often use renderings. This is an example of a rendering of the dam existing on the left and what it would look like to the community with the dam removed on the right. But our benefit cost analysis and preliminary engineering design, this dam removal is funded by FEMA, the removal of the dam and some of the sediment behind that dam will lower the 100-year flood elevation by 2 feet for 10 homes in the community. That's a big difference for 10 homes when you're thinking about having to buy out multiple homes. So the cost of this is tremendous. And I know I need to wrap up, so this is my last slide. And it's just saying that the safest dam is no dam at all, and that improving our understanding of how rivers function and the consequences of dam ownership are some of the greatest outcomes related to this work. And I'll leave it at that. And I'll just say, may the force be with you. The Dam Task Force was a tremendous part of this work, and I highly recommend it. And with that, I'll stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karina. And thank you to all of our speakers for this wonderful information they shared. We still have a few questions in the chat. If folks still have questions, please feel free to put them on. If we have time, we'll go through them now, or we'll send a follow-up with all the questions answered. So thank you again for joining us for this important webinar. We really appreciate your all's time and interest in the subject, and we will talk to you all soon. Karina, there's one specific question for you, and then I haven't read this last one yet. Folks, you're welcome to hang out while we go through this for just a moment. But the official webinar is over, so thanks all.
I'm looking at the question. We have 47 people on the Dam Task Force email distribution list. How many entities are represented by those 47 folks? Oh, we actually have more than 47, Todd, and I don't know. I would say at least, I can't share exactly how many, but I would say probably half of that are different entities. So thank you for that.
Okay, that is good to know. Serena said she's waiting for me to kick her out.
That last one's a really tough question.
Um,
From John Paul Shanahan.
Yeah, I might be able to speak to that. We definitely, at least with FEMA funding, the communities have to take on the project versus a nonprofit because of the funding source. So we're constantly meeting with towns, regional planning commissions, and natural resource conservation districts who are partners, who can be that partner, that municipal partner for projects. I don't know if that answers all of it, but that's a start.
I think that's that's part of the answer. The other is about who has responsibility for for dam safety, basically. And are there cases where communities have taken on that responsibility? The responsibility lies with the dam owner, fundamentally. When I worked in the state of Wisconsin, Wisconsin had legislation at the time, I'm not sure if it's still there, that if a dam owner wanted to remove a dam, they had to first offer it up for sale to anybody else that wanted to buy the dam, with the intention being that if somebody really wanted to have the dam there, they need to take responsibility for the safety of that dam. And if the owner themselves wanted to take the dam out, they could take the dam out, provided there wasn't another entity that wanted to take it on. So that kind of changed the tone of public meetings around dam removals. And that if somebody was objecting to a project, the solution was, that they could purchase the dam themselves and maintain its safety.
I put that we answered the question live, and I also added some more notes.
Great.
Folks. All right, well, that's all she wrote. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. This was great. I'm going to hang on to make sure that nothing gets deleted as we close out the webinar.